Kauai, the northernmost of the islands that we discussed, because Ni Hao was pretty much reserved for Hawaiians. But Kauai had a harbor and plains and so on, and early plantations, so that you find on Kauai towns which are still thought of as Portuguese. Kalaheo is one of them. Koloa would have many Portuguese because of the plantation. So the Kauai Portuguese, I think, in general, were later arrivals than those early ones on Oahu and Maui. Those Kauai became Portuguese settlement favorite spot from 1878 on. As far as I know, there was no Protestant incursion there. That was somehow the movement went south rather than north.
My name is Bryan J. Baptiste. J stands for James. Born of Anthony C. Baptiste Jr. and Eva Gomez. I have Portuguese lines on both sides of the family, traced back to, I think, Cape Verde Islands and the Azores. And other than that, that's what I know. My grandparent, on my grandfather's side, he came here as an immigrant, and my grandmother was actually already third generation Portuguese woman. My grandfather owned a dairy in Omau, and
beginning of 20th century.
I don't even know the exact date. I haven't really looked at the exact date of when it was. All my grandparents died before I was born, because I'm a Rotun crop. My dad was 45 already when I was born, and so all my grandparents except my Portuguese grandmother, which was a Nobrega family, died before I was born. So you have the Baptiste family, the Nobrega family, and on my mother's side you have a Resentes family as well, mixed in a little bit with Portuguese, a little bit with Hawaiian, Chinese, and French. Well, when I was born, my dad was chairman of the Board of Supervisors for the island, which is equivalent to being mayor at that time. My childhood was not a normal one necessarily, in that most of my relationship with my parents were at various functions and those kind of things. My dad also, he had the U.S. postal contract during World War II, and so started a trucking business. He also ran all the school bus system for the island. At that time, all the kids went to school by truck. So as far as the Portuguese heritage per se, it wasn't where we had it crossed all ethnicities. It wasn't heavily Portuguese background, because my dad had to deal with all the nationalities. As far as the Portuguese, some of the things in my youth were some of the plantation softball teams. I used to play plantation against plantation, and the Portuguese used to have some teams as well. Aunties and uncles, I remember them cooking in the brick ovens and cooking the breads and making their soups and different things. My grandparents, according to my understanding, again were farmers, so they had a dairy and they raised all their own food and all those kind of things and made Portuguese dishes. But again, like I say, it was before I was born, so these are just stories passed on to me. Other than that, with my mother's side of the family, you know, we always had certain kinds of foods at home. Every so often there were Portuguese, but our house was more cosmopolitan, I think, than Portuguese. Well, he was involved at a time where actually the working people had a real hard time. And so he was mayor during the Democratic, or chairman during the Democratic Revolution in 1954. And prior to that, he was very strong with the unions and being an advocate for the working person. And so I think in his work going from town to town, either through carrying people on the buses or the kids, or carrying the mail, you know, the mailman of those days kind of got to see the whole island as a total, and probably got a better perspective than most or earfuls from most on what people thought was needed on the island. And so I think from those experiences and his exposure to the different towns, it made him a very viable candidate. So he was on the Board of Supervisors, I believe, for 6 years, chairman of the board for 12, and then in the State House for 2 years. Although being in a position like this is like being in a fishbowl, and there's always criticisms and things like that, it's also a place where you can make changes for the betterment of your island and changes to the systemic way we do things within government. You can't change, it's very difficult to change from outside. You have to be in here. So in a way, it's a sacrifice to be in the position and to, you know, put your nose to the grindstone and keep focused and make small changes as we go along. That's what kind of motivated me to run in the first place, is the ability to be in a place to be able to change things. Well, in the past we had a Portuguese Chamber of Commerce, I believe, or a Portuguese Cultural Society. That died out probably about 15 years ago. The Portuguese and their relations now are, most of it is through the Catholic Church and the various organizations, women's and men's, that are within the structure of the church. Geographically, you know, like in all the islands, there are certain towns that have heavier concentrations of Portuguese than others, with Kalaheo on this island having a large population of Portuguese. And that's basically because Portuguese were basically agronomic in farming or ranching or those kind of professions. And so you see, you know, heavier concentrations in the more mountain-based arenas. And I think that carries through on all the islands, whether you're on Makawao, on Maui, or you know, I'm not sure which is the Portuguese communities on the Big Island, but
yeah, they are ranching.
they were more ranchers and herders, and you know, so not as much fishermen as the rest. Well, I think the Portuguese need to make a more concerted effort on retaining the culture. It's very easy being a Caucasian of Caucasian ancestry, whether it be Portuguese, to kind of blend into the larger Caucasian population. We need to make a concerted effort to recognize our roots and what we're all about, and take pride in those roots, similar to how the Filipino community does, or the Japanese community, and create a more definitive effort, I think, to establish that, to pass on. Because I think as society gets more modern and the world gets smaller, we have less and less chance to keep a separate identity from a larger population base. You know, the plantations went through various cycles or waves of migration, and the Portuguese were fortunate enough to be some of the earliest migrants, so naturally they elevated to the Luna status or supervisory status. The plantation, we have one left on the island, which is Gay and Robinson, and I think one of two, because Maui has the other one that's left. There are many people who still live today in housing that's provided by the plantations, both in Pakala and Kamakani, and still depend on the plantations to provide them that social infrastructure. I think that's slowly dwindling away as sugar becomes less and less viable on the world market. But I'm hoping as the last remaining two plantations transform a bit, that they still keep some of the plantation culture and history and traditions together. The plantation camps really offered a microcosm of humanity and how people of different cultures could blend in. You know, as you went along, you went from the Caucasian to a more specialized Portuguese to Chinese to Japanese to Filipino, or you know, and it went in that route. So it set up the social stratus of our heritage and how things were. And as people climbed up the plantation ladder, they also spread into the community as leaders as well. And I think that's how my dad and many of his generation got involved. Hannibal Tavares on Maui with the Sugar Planters Association. You know, there have been many Portuguese leaders across the state. So I think, you know, it's the timing of migration and the natural elevation in status as people worked through experience with the plantations caused this all to happen. And there's actually a number of camps out there, like I said. Where you were was Kamakani, which is the one with the lampposts that you go down to the plantation, and then next to it is Kamakani also, that's in front of the store there and Thrifty Mart. And then you have Pakala, which is further west. Wait, is it further west? Yeah, I believe it's further east. You have Pakala, which is also still inhabited. You also have a smaller subdivision across the highway, which I believe is called Camp 6. And so that's on the Mauka side that has residents still there as well.
And those are the people still working the plantation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
People still working the plantations.
So the plantation history is still alive here in the
Oh yeah, it's still alive there. It's still a vital part, I believe, of our culture. As the houses get older and profits from the plantation get less and less, it becomes more and more difficult for the plantation to keep the housing viable. You know, it's hard to imagine a single corporation being able to house that many people, all their employees. But you've seen camps over the years since I've been born disappear. Now there's nothing there, and so it's a storied history of people coming to America for a better life, working very hard, just coming together to share culture, language, food, the whole works. And so to me, it was a point that I'd love to be able to get back to, where you have communities that all know each other and are comfortable in sharing resources, and creates that bond where adults look over the kids and the other generations and extend their circle of concern over and above their immediate family. And so they reach out, as I used to tell my friends, if you started at the top of Kalaheo at Pu'uvai Drive and you did something wrong, by the time you got to the bottom, somebody would be there to stop you, because whether you call it Portuguese wireless or whether you call it just good, strong community, everybody cared enough to take notice and show concern. There's no state that had such a multitude of migration, at least in the last 100 years, of so many different cultures, so many different ethnicities. And in many places on the mainland, when people migrate, they come into an area of a state, and they all congregate all together. And so here you had Portuguese camps and Japanese camps and Filipino camps, but they were all really forced to come to a central meeting point through work and through the social activities that took place, and that's what causes it to be different from any of the other places that we know. I'm proud of my Portuguese heritage. A lot of times we're the butt of various jokes or whatever the case may be. But there's also many things we as a culture can be very proud of in what we've been able to achieve, and how we've been able to take on leadership positions in all of government and industry. And so, I wish I could only have met and known my grandparents more than I have, and gotten to know a little more of what was back there. And I think that's what's important. I'm glad you're doing this, because this, at least for those at some point where the modern world tends to gobble us up into one mass, will still give people a way to look at the differences and how we got from point A to point Z, and some of the steps in between.
My name is Lorraine Bettencourt Lizama, born here in Kauai, and in 1919. I'm 84 years old.
And your family came from?
My father's family came from Madeira, and my mother's family came from the Azores. The oldest was from Madeira that they came from. That's my father's father and mother. They were married there in Madeira, had one child, brought her on the ship around the Cape of Good Hope, and came to Kauai. Took them about 3 months, but they brought like she told us all, she brought even her cow, that came in so that she could have milk for her baby. They came up and they were just packed, and a lot of children died, on the way. But she loved it. She came here, and my grandfather, as soon as he came here, he just didn't want any part to go back to the old country. Kept asking him if he wanted to go back, but he said no. This was his island that he loved. Well, they said the life was very hard there. And as they were growing up, they didn't have enough until my grandfather bought a piece of land there. And then he sort of raised, my grandfather in Madeira raised goats, I guess. That's how they, and even when I went back there, I found out they'd raised a lot of goat. They have goat cheese and goat milk, which is supposed to be very healthy. And he said, well, they were growing up, they had their Holy Ghost feasts, which my grandparents were very devout Catholics. And they observed all the Catholic holidays. They went to all the feasts that they had. We called it Holy Ghost feast, with their banners and their queens. I guess I can't remember now, but I think my grandmother, my mother's mother, was one of them that was the queen there and the Holy Ghost there. When we grew up, my father was a section supervisor. He rode a horse through the plantation. He had sort of a good job there with the plant as time went on, and he retired from the plantation. But we had our own home. My father bought a piece of land with what he earned while he was young, and of course, he had cattle, raised his cattle, his beef, and that's what we have today, our land that we live on. He gave, all of us inherited the land, and we all have now properties, which was given to us, which was very good. All we did was build our home, our land, free land. Well, we would go to school and go to the beach. We lived close to the beach. And of course, my grandmother had a cow, and milking cows. So we'd go to school. After school, we'd walk, and then we'd milk the cow for milk for the family. My grandparents taught us responsibility and what was good, And she raised her own pig. We made Portuguese sausage, blood sausage, from all the pig. And she had her own beef, which was good, and our own milk. So we made all of that. We helped her, my grandparents. My grandparents spoke Portuguese. My father's mother and father, they couldn't speak English. They never did, but we understood. We'd speak it, but I've lost that tradition. Even when I went back to Portugal in '69, I sort of had a hard time speaking then. And my mother's father, he learned to speak English because he would see them going to the polls to vote, during the time, and he wanted to vote because he was sort of a hard person, and he wanted to get involved in everything. So he insisted that he became an American citizen, just so that he could vote and vote for the man he wanted, because he could not see the plantations telling people how to vote. We were told, well, when you worked in the plantation, they would come and pick you up to vote, and they'd tell you who to vote for. Yes, so my grandfather couldn't see it. So he wanted to do his own thing, and he wanted to vote for the man he wanted, And that's how it was. we've lost a lot of the traditions of Portuguese. The only thing is cooking, maybe doing something, and of course the feast days. You know, certain the Holy Ghost feast. We we sort of kept that tradition. You know, but it's too bad that we don't have a Portuguese association here so that we could sort of revive it. We had it before. We had a nice thing going, but everything has been stopped. People have died, and you know, ones that started it. It's the fun time. It's the sharing with everyone, and going to mass, and then parade on the parade. Go to the parade and have your queen and her attendants. It was enjoyable. Those we miss that a lot. You know, we've had that. It's too bad my great grandchildren don't happen to have that, you know.
So that tradition here in Kauai
It's no, it's no more. You don't have it unless you travel to Kula or to the mainland, California. Certain parts they have it there.
Yeah.
But my mother taught me about pickled pork, and that's what I like. My family loves it too. They always ask me to do it, but it's been years since I've done it because I'm getting at the age where cooking is a little tiresome. So I, what I do, I have the pork and the meat. I pickle it with your vinegar, garlic, a little water, and a little pepper, chili pepper, a Hawaiian chili. That's something new that I put on for taste. And I have it pickled overnight. Then the next day I'll boil the pork first in the sauce. Then put it aside, put it in the oven. Then put my meat, the same thing, turn it on two sides.
So you boil it until it's cooked?
No, just for a little while.
Okay.
Just turn it over like you braising your meat. And then you put it in the oven, and then, of course, you have to time it. It all depends on the size of the pork. Then after it's done,
So what, 400 degrees Fahrenheit?
I beg your pardon?
What is the temperature of
Oh, 350, moderate oven, yeah, in a moderate oven. And then after I have my pork, I mean my potatoes, slice my potatoes, I prick my potatoes, and marinate it in the sauce and cook it, parboil it, till it's half done. Then when it's done, half done, I lay it around the pork and roast it so it gets brown. And then of course I like my Portuguese soup,
So what you do with the pork?
the red beans. That you boil your ham hock while it's done and put your beans in until the beans are done. Practically.
So you cook the beans,
Beans,
in the water.
water, you put your pork, your ham hock, and you put your kidney beans until it's half tender. Then you add your onions, sliced onions, carrots, and boil it. Put your garlic, and then you put your tomatoes. They usually put tomato sauce, but I put tomato soup in, or vegetables soup. Vegetables, because I don't care for tomato sauce. And then I'll put my potatoes, and at the end, well, you can put your sausage. What I do, I prick my sausage, and I put it in there too for flavor. Then just before it's done, you add your cabbage, sliced cabbage, or watercress, and then turn off your fire. Becomes good soup. It gets thick,
Yeah, very
healthy, very healthy.